The essence of visual art is to poetically describe the human visual experience via a language we call form. Today is all about form. In the previous video, we started this painting, and the topic was your first acrylic portrait painting. Now we will build on to this. Key term 1, plane. Flat surface in three-dimensional space. Think of a flat sheet of paper floating in space. Now this brings us towards our next key term, value. How light or how dark a plane is. Light cannot exist without dark. Key term 3, plane boundary. The topography of surface planes. Stay with me here. It is not that bad. Know the generic plane head. This is something you can memorize. Something like this. Looks pretty ugly, right? Now, once you learn the next key term, you can do this. Just like magic, we make this thing look 3D. Key term 4, modeling. The correct placement of value per plane. Don't overanalyze this part. Making a surface look round is predictable. You must memorize the generic sphere. Now, put this all together. Form is a description of a 3D visual experience using 2D shapes. 3D visual experience using 2D shapes. Visual what? Remember, the essence of visual art is to poetically describe the human visual experience via a language we call form. Now that I've introduced the 4 key terms that make up form, which are plane, value, plane boundary, and modeling, we will create an analogy to music. Think about the 4 key terms in form and think about it as a musical instrument. 4 strings to a guitar. Yes, there are guitars that have 4 strings, all different varieties of guitars with 4 strings that can create very powerful music. Think about painting as no different. The only problem is that in the visual experience, it is very, very different from listening to music. For example, a person can walk right by a Vermeer and not even notice. But that same person can walk by a concert and hear the music and enjoy the rhythm and the melody of the music and be immediately drawn to that experience. Throughout our lives, we are bombarded with experiences that shape the way that we think. From the sound of a bird chirping, or do you remember the first time you saw water droplets on the windshield of the car, the way that it moved left, right, up, and down? That feeling you had when you held your puppy for the first time, or maybe you held your newborn child for the very first time. Those experiences shape you. They shape us. There is immense joy, sorrow, anger, motivation, desperation. All these experiences come out wonderfully in music. You can tell when someone's angry, they're sad, they're hopeful, among other things, but the emotion of it all is so easily translated into our minds. The same can be done with the 4 key terms in form. The same can be done in visual art. Even if you're just painting the same portraits left and right all day, the beauty is in the subtleties. The subtleties of how you paint an eye, the way that you apply an edge to the chin, how you carve out the bottom eyelid, the way that you simplify the ear and leave it slightly unfinished, the way that your brush strokes are zigzagging across the background. These are things that require very close examination from the viewer, but these things are there. The difference between a Rembrandt painting, an El Greco painting, a John Singer Sargent painting, these differences are so subtle. In fact, if you gather most of the artists, you will find that they do use the same language of form, but they describe it in very different ways. And as an artist, you don't have to think about it at all. It's pretty much like handwriting. It's pretty much like a musician coming up with a song. Think about Eminem singing about rapping about all of his experiences in life, some more violent than others, but he didn't have to overanalyze it. He just felt it. The same thing with Bob Marley and with all these other musicians. You imagine all of these experiences are things that are innate in you. These are things that you want to express. You'll notice with the form in this painting, I have left the light around the eye completely flat, and I added more substance to the forms closest to the chin, closest to the shadows. Now, the way I interpreted this painting is different than the way that most other people would interpret it, because we're all individuals. But the way that I chose to go about it was such that I was building from the dark up to the light, and then went back in with these subtleties. And it's because the way that I observe the imagery is different from the way that other people would observe it. But these slight differences are the things that really create the visual poetry, harmony in the way that we paint. Even though to the untrained eye, it may look like we're doing the same thing over and over again. The way that I leave the eyelid almost two-dimensional, as if there are just simply lines. But from a distance, I already know, through all of my experience, that those lines will appear to look three-dimensional. And it is really as simple as that. Know those 4 key terms that I told you. Memorize the generic head. Memorize the generic sphere. And understand the differences between the model that you are studying and the generic human head. You need to use both knowledge that you have retained from the generic head and the generic sphere, and then you apply that knowledge into the way you describe the form. But the way that you see shapes, the way that you perceive these shapes, are just like musical notes in a composition of which you don't have to worry about. It's something that will emerge naturally as you progress in your art. And this is why form is such an important thing for you to be able to develop. It's your main source of communication. And also, going back to the idea of not having to think about style or anything like that, imagine we actually never see ourselves. We look at pictures of ourselves, we look at a mirror. The mirror is the reversed image. We will never see how we truly look. The same can be said with art. Don't stress yourself out about your paintings. Don't think about it being so bad. Don't worry about maybe making the same painting that someone else painted or anything like that, because we can't ever really see what other people see in our artwork, and usually we are more critical of ourselves than we should be. So don't overthink these things. I want you to strengthen your abilities with the 4 key terms in form. Always continue to improve on yourself, and always know that your art will always be individual, genuine, and beautiful, because you've developed the skills necessary to describe your own visual experience.